Okay. 3, 2. Shall we do the whole 3, 2, 1? Yeah, yeah. No, look, I've got some coffee and I've got my little vape, so I'm good. Uh, Hanru, morning, buddy. How's your last couple of days of judging been?
Yesterday, pretty much the whole day was occupied with judging. It was a
Mhm.
lot of fun. It was tiring, but it was a lot of fun to see everything. I was very amped so I could get through it. So yeah, it was good. And yours?
Yeah, no, for me, I'm like left speechless, bro. Having 50 plus entries, having everyone so excited, everyone so motivated to get this competition off the ground. It was really cool to see. So, for the guy who's been trying to build up this community, it's cool to see, and I'm just happy to see that.
Actually,
Uh,
I think we have doubled the last year, which is
that
fantastic.
is correct, yeah. So it's nice to see that kind of growth, and then for me to be hosting a painting class on Sunday and it's got full seats booked. That's
Nice.
exciting to see. So it shows the community is growing, which is awesome to see. All right, folks. This is the feedback video for the Madness painting competition, Madness 3D painting competition that was held during the period of July, October. I am Richard, host of the Wildstorm Studios Discord, or should I say co-host of the Wildstorm Studios Discord and owner of Wildstorm Studios. Full-time commissioned artist, self-employed. And I'm very, very happily joined today by, in my opinion, one of the fastest up-and-coming miniature artists in the country, Mr. Hanru Vorster. How are you, sir?
It's good. It's good. Um, name has been introduced. I've been a member on the Discord since the Discord started. I'm an admin there, help regulate some things. I'm also a commission painter, not full time, only part time. Yeah, really, really happy to be here and have the privilege to look at some of the community's greatest work that they can bring forward. And yeah, it's great to be your co-host, Richard.
Thanks, bud. Yeah. And as you're saying that, I'm being rude and trying to get rid of microphones hanging in front of my eyes. So I apologize for that. All right. But before we get started, I think it's important to just note for everyone that first, the role of a judge is never easy. Nobody's ever happy with your decisions. So in lieu of that, we'd like to ask everyone to please be respectful of the fact that it's never easy to be the judge. At the same time, we tend to miss out on all the excitement and all the hype of the competition because we're the grim reapers that come in and make the decision at the end. So we haven't had the joy of being part of this whole build and this whole hype. And then thirdly is the fact that an online painting competition is extremely hard to judge because we're judging based on photos and based on images. So not only do we bring in our own subjective views on what we'd like to see in your works, it's also very hard for us to make a good estimation based purely on just what we see on the image. So in lieu of that, like I say, we'd like to ask all contestants to please be mindful and respectful of that. And in turn, we will do our utmost best to give you a fair and proper assessment. So with that, we're not going to waste any time. We've got enough figures to get through. So we're going to go get started right away. So I'm going to bring up the small figure category first. So let's bring that up on screen. Give me 2 seconds.
Just to reiterate the fairness, this is the first time me and Richard are talking about any entries together. We've not shared any opinions, anything thus far.
That's right. Well, you actually raise another good point that we need to make sure that everyone's aware of is the fact that we have not had the opportunity of seeing any of the entries. We didn't know what our members of our own community were painting because we asked them specifically to please keep it anonymous. So it's been an anonymous judging as best as we can make it. And like I said, we have not seen the images until we started our judging. I know that Henry spent his time judging yesterday. I spent my time judging last night. And now the two of us are having this first time opportunity to share our thoughts and share our findings with you guys. So let's get cracking. So this is titled S1. We're going to put down the titles of the figures because as of this point, we still don't know who owns which figure, who is the artist behind each one. So we'll go by the title that was given to your entry by Madness 3D on their side. Okay, so this is entry. This is the category small figures, and this is entry number S1, Sierra 1. All right, Hanru, You want to kick things off?
So, the one I'll talk about is entries. I will just so we've got different categories. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, so that you have to paint according to those standards. So I'm going to start with the first one, story. I thought there was a clear environment picture with the blue base. I can see that it is called environment. And then for the color, I think the use of blues on the model itself as well ties nicely in with the base. I think the red squirrel, albeit a nice pop color that brings some attention to a little figure on the figure. I felt that the use of color was a little bit warm for the scene. And then as for technique, I thought it was really neat work. The items are separated really nicely. Good use of watches in good moderation, so there's not excessive cooling, just enough to highlight some details. And then the overall finish, I think it was a well representation of a gold environment. And yeah, the only thing I would like from this piece is to see some more texture work on the leathers and the squirrel.
Yeah, I think that was pretty much my finding. This is a good, solid beginner entry. Good clean base coats, nice, neat trim, because that's always what, in my opinion, that's one of the first steps of becoming a good miniature painter. Get neat, stay within the lines, make your volumes clearly defined, and that's the first, important hurdle of becoming a good miniature painter. So, in my opinion, this is a good, solid beginner entry. Nice, good, clean coats. I agree with Hanru. Could do with a little bit of highlighting and starting to move into the next progression as a painter. Bring in your highlights, bring in your texture work. And also remember that if you're entering a painting contest, that when it comes to basing, to just add the base as is going to limit your possibility of winning your category, because of course that with competition we expect you to bring in a little bit more. So that's the only thing that in my opinion lost a little bit out in the figure. There was nothing added to the base to give me story, context, and where he is and location. I know he's on a rocky outcrop, but that's where it stops. So that's the only thing for me, but I think it's a good solid entry. And I like that you also pointed out the little red animal figure on his arm. I like the choice of color because it's a good spot color amongst the rest of the category. So a nice, good, solid beginner entry for my books. Cool. All right, we'll move on to number S2. And this one was a fun one to look at. Yeah. Tell you what, shall we alternate as we start? So I'll start this one, you start the next one, and we'll move on from there. Okay, cool. All right, with this one, absolutely loved the color palette. Loved the use of colors. Loved the use of the turquoise as a beautiful spot color. Loved the fact that he focused on story and narrative because he gave us context. He allowed us to see that it's in this spiderweb sort of area environment. I love the little sign that gives us even more narrative. So ticks on the box for me on that one. Only bit of advice is that I would say always remember the motto in miniature painting: less is more. So maybe a little bit less on the spider webs because there was a little bit too much, and at one stage it looked like a whole lot of hair instead of actually looking like spiders, like spider webs. But otherwise, love the story, love the color on this one, and a good solid entry.
So I agree with a lot of the points that you raised there. So for me, it was a great play of words on the side. So a little bit of comedy goes a long way, and the spider really looks big.
Yeah.
And I can see some people some traders on the Silk Road being eaten by the spider.
Yeah.
So the color, I thought it was a great use of spot colors, namely the blues and the venom sacs. You can see the different elements of the spider was nicely separated.
Yeah.
You can clearly see the eyes and the high value contrast on the abdomen, which was great. It was a great use of almost like a comic sketch style.
Yeah, that's what it came across to me as well. Yeah, very much like that.
Spider, it's got 8 legs, right? That would get overwhelming for a viewer to look at. But because there's so many edge highlights and contrast used on the little free hands, it's easily separated.
Exactly.
On the colors, I would suggest maybe a different tone for the eyes because that is the same tone as for the symbolism on the abdomen. So it can be misleading as to think that's also maybe like a symbol on the head.
True that. Well, there's also that famous statement when it comes to competitions, and that is faces and bases win competitions. And the point when it comes to faces is that the face is usually the first thing that draws the viewer's eye. So you as the painter need to make sure you bring emphasis to that. And I agree with you. My eye gets naturally drawn to the abdomen and this lovely turquoise, but I don't see the head, and I don't get drawn to the head unless I go looking for it. So a good point to raise for that person moving forward.
Yeah, so I think on technique it was really good because the highest part on the model is the brightest part. So the volumetric lighting on the model is great. It makes it nice to read. It's pleasant to look at. But like Richard also said, that high value above the face might detract away from looking at the face.
Yeah.
Some good finishes on the board. So I think that the technique for wood there is really good. So after overall finish, it's a nice, nasty spider nest feel with all the silk, and readability is really nice with all the edge highlights.
Perfect. All right, let's move on to the next one. This was S3.
So I'll start with this one.
All right.
Okay, so for the story, I could see that there's a lot of movement, right? So he's obviously summoning these horses, and there's a powerful stance. In the use of color, I think the water has deeper and lighter tones in it, so that's kind of a nice way to bring some depth to the water. I think what's particularly stood out for me here is the satin finish on the scales. Right? So not necessarily just the color use, but the finish as well. It really looks wet, And then what I noticed also about this entry is that you can see that there are some nice spot highlights on the chest and on the shoulder.
Yeah, I picked that up as well.
Yes, so starting to get into that volumetric focus on the miniature. What I would have liked to see is that volumetric focus throughout the miniature. So maintaining that level of focus throughout all the individual elements. Overall, for the technique, I think it was neatly painted, perfectly focused on muscle highlights, using a satin finish, like I said, was very smart to show the wetness of the scale, and overall it was presented neatly, and you can see all the elemental differences.
All right, but on my side, I'm going to completely agree with you on one of the things that you kept mentioning is that it's very neat and very clean. What's funny is I look down at my notes. My notes say clean but flat. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is it's beautiful, clean lines, nice definition of all the volumes. I see the skin is nice and clean, that you can see the different fabric areas and so on and so forth. I like the attention to the water, but nothing is popping. Nothing is really standing out. So you haven't brought attention to the horses as much as I would like to see. You haven't brought enough attention to the face, but absolute, points on the board for paying attention to the chest area and starting to bring out the musculature, the neatness of everything. So that's why I say a very clean, very good entry, a little bit flat on, the oomph that I'm looking for that brings my attention, but otherwise a very, very solid, good entry.
For sure. The particular thing I liked also about the entry was the blues in the hair. So it's not just grey and white hair, right? There's some blues in it. So that also ties well in with the environment that's presented.
And at the same time, and then at the same time, just on a point that you and I had raised earlier before we started judging, which is the fact that a lot of these printing entries have the benefit of coming with a base that already gives you a bit of story and gives you a bit of context. But don't forget that as a painting competition, what we want to see you do is take that piece and add to it. To just simply take it and paint it nicely is one thing. But to really add to it would really make it pop. So even bringing in ideas of playing around with foamy texture, the kind of white frost that you get on water, would have been nice to see introduced into the horses that are coming out from his feet. So that sort of thing. It's faces and bases. It's one thing that I'm going to keep harping on when it comes to competition pieces, faces and bases. So yes, I agree that you've got this lovely base that's got these horses that are swirling out from his feet. But I want to see you add to them. I want to see you bring in white frost. I want to see a bit of even a gloss varnish to maybe give it that more sort of glistening water effect. It's those little elements that make a model really pop. Cool.
Making that thematic base that's given to you, but really playing with it.
Absolutely.
That level.
Absolutely. All right. Let's move on to entry number 4. So this is now entry number S4. And this one. This one had me smiling, Ray. So I'll get this one started. This one is probably one of my best entries in the category. Love the fact that the person took on a color scheme and an idea that very sort of neon cyber kind of color effect. Love the fact that they stuck with it, and it's actually followed through to the point where the miniature you can see matches what was the inspiration, which is the image behind that color palette. So it matches it beautifully and perfectly. Big thumbs up for giving us that resource by actually putting it as the backdrop for the image. So now I know exactly what you're inspired by, and I know exactly what you drew from. Just be mindful, of course, that if you're entering a competition, what I would have done is done one with the backdrop and done one without the backdrop. So that way I'm not detracted by the eye, because when I look at it, unfortunately, the horse does get a little bit lost because of all that craziness that's happening in the background. But beautiful entry. Love the use of colors. Love the palette. Love the fact that this person stepped out of the boundaries instead of just, painting it up as a nice, beautiful horse, and really played with a really artistic color palette. That for me was just exciting to see. So big thumbs up on that.
Sure, I think you hit the nail on the head. One of my notes is the photo is taken with a great background, right? So it immediately gives you that sense of the intent was to be striking.
Exactly.
And when I looked at it, I kind of sat back a little bit and I was like, this is striking. So I think well done on achieving that. For the colors, I think the paint used, it's not an easy paint to use.
No.
And I can definitely see there are blues, there are more of a pinkish color here and there. So nice separation of that. However, if I look at this model in the base, there's not a lot of color differentiation between one of the elements on the base. I couldn't really figure out if it was a log from the base and the ground on the base. It was hard for me to differentiate between that. But in saying that, the individual elements on the model I can see is clearly defined, right? So I think really props there. And then I think the overall finish, it was really striking, really nice to look at. I think the use of the background was very clever. I really enjoyed the entry.
Yeah. No, this is one of those ones that got me smiling when I come across it, and I just gave an instant smile. There's a couple throughout the whole competition that had me cheering in the middle of the night all by myself, because I was really just so proud of some of the entries, and this was one of them that got me really excited. So big thumbs up on this one. And for me, it's something to sort of preach out to the rest of the folks out there. This is the kind of stuff you want to be doing for competitions, because this is the kind of stuff that makes you stand out from everybody else. That's one of the rules of painting for a competition. Never mind that you've got to paint it perfectly and focus on all the elements and all the techniques. You've got to also remember, you need to stand out in the crowd of all the other unicorns and space marines and everything on the table. And doing something like this is definitely a way to get that kind of attention. So yeah, big thumbs up on this one. Cool. Let's move on to the next one. The next one is going to be, if I stand corrected, S5.
I like this one.
Cool.
Yeah, so for me, for a story, I could see that it's a hunter and a beast, right? It's immediately set into an environment that simulates they're on a hunt, they're outside, it's muddy, it's, they're moving. And the use of color here was quite interesting for me, because the use of red is almost the same for the creature as for the robe. Now, this can be a good thing and a bad thing. The bad thing is it's monotone, and it kind of gives you the impression that it's the same type of element. It's the same type of the flesh and the cloth. There's no real separation. Saying that, having them similar in color, in this case very similar in color, ties the two figures together. So this immediately gives me a sense that this is her pet. This is what she does. She goes on hunts with this thing. And the use of color there, tying them together, was nicely done for me. The bone color achieved with the wash gives it a nice old feel. So I think nailed it on the bone structures. Yeah, I really like that. In saying that, I think it's a little bit of an excessive use of the wash, especially on the neck.
Yeah.
I feel like a little bit of the detail is lost, but for the color and for the effect that you wanted to achieve, I think you've nailed it on the head. Overall, I think the figure is neatly painted. Just reduce the wash a little bit, as it can desaturate and destroy some details for the overall finish. I struggled a little bit to see what's happening in the face, for example.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people use washes for shading, and that's a great thing to do.
Yeah.
But excessive use can detract from some of the details.
Yeah.
So overall, great entry. I love the link between the two. I like the story it tells. Yes, I enjoyed
Yeah, so I think with everything that you said, you and I are both in the same school of thought. In my regards, I like the use of color. I love the homogeneous sort of feel that the familiar or the pet belongs to that character or has been spawned on by that character. So I love that concept. I love the little bit of spot color on the hair of the creature because it draws your eye to that creature's head. Where the piece fell short a little bit was more on technique than anything else. I can see you've got the idea. I can see you get inspired. I can see that you've got a good eye for color and starting to gauge a bit of color without thinking too much about it. But where for me, it loses out a little bit is on technique. Over excessive use of washes, especially if you look on the hood on the character, you can see it's got a very mottled, spatchy kind of finish. And I don't know if that was intentional or if that was just, over excessive use of washes and it gave it that mottled effect. But pay attention to some of your techniques, especially things like good solid base coats, clean lines, and being able to define the volumes. Like Hanru was saying, for me, I can't see the face of the character. It doesn't draw me in and it doesn't make me look at it immediately because it gets a little bit lost in the colors. But otherwise, like I say, points for color, points for story, a little bit of a loss for technique. So an area for you to concentrate moving forward is now working on some of your good core techniques and get those down pat. And yeah, if you can get that right, you're off to a great start on this one.
With the colors used in the story told, I think if you reduce your wash a little bit and focus more on just self-normal highlights, this piece would be fantastic.
Yeah, fully agree.
We'll push it. Yes.
Cool. Right, let's move on to the next one. Like I say, guys, we've got 50 entries, so we're gonna try to keep things nice and short and concise. Right, this is now S6, one of those ones that had me going, yay, baby. Yeah, for this one, you've got yourself a good model when you now lean forward and you start looking for problems because you can't find them offhand. You can't see them straight off the bat. And that for me is like, tick, 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 you're off on the right track. You've got me now paying attention and you're now making me work for my money as a judge. Love the use of color. Love the clean definition of all the materials. I mean, you can see all the pouches, you can see all the detailing, and that for me is very key and very important on small figures. Love the use of a nice clean color palette so that you've got a beautiful blue and that slightly beige color that's hitting for a non-metallic on the shoulder pad. Lovely stuff. Love the little bit of OSL effect on the eyes and the cannon because that draws my eye even more so to the face of the character. The only thing, and this is like I say, this is the kind of piece that makes you now come in and start looking for problems. And if I'm to be picky, the only thing for me that lacks a little bit on this one, and like I say, I'm just being picky, is a little bit of story. Only because the base it's a beautiful wooden base. But where? For me, I even thought even a simple little pile of 3 little cannonballs, because he's holding this bazooka, maybe 3 little cannonballs on the floor, boom, there's your story. It doesn't need much, but it does need an element just to give me a bit more story. But that's the only thing I could nitpick about it. Beautiful work, beautiful technique, beautiful use of color. Like I say, if I'm being picky, just a little bit of extra story for me, but that's it. It's just a wonderful piece.
Yeah. It's very much in line with what I said. You can see my notes. So, word for word, my story, I said, not sure if there is a correlation between the eyes and the signage on the gun.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
I can see he is on some sort of flagged base, maybe a ship.
Yeah.
So, for me, it was also adding a little element on that base to show like it's on a ship, or maybe it's in a tavern, or that sold the story.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I think for me, the place where this entry lost the majority of points for me because everything else is so well executed was the lack of story elements.
Yeah.
So for the color, the use of color is very controlled. So it's pleasantly placed, and the differences in the segments is well done. The black lining, whether it's achieved with a wash or with a freehand or whatever, it's very well done. Even on the belt buckle, you can see all the little individual pieces. And when I looked at it the first time, I felt like it would be overwhelming. But it actually works very nicely because there's so much going on.
Yeah.
I thought that the skin color was really defined in terms of values.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the values in the skin color.
Mm-hmm.
And when similar colors are used, they differ in tonality. For example, the blue on the main cloth is wearing versus the blue on the pouch.
Yeah.
It's a different blue. Right?
Exactly.
I think that was really good.
Yeah. I think this is a good exercise for anyone who entered this competition. This is a good exercise to look at when Hanru and I refer to a color palette. That you can bring in, for example, blue as the core value color that you bring into your piece. But you see how, like Hanru's pointed out, the pouch is a slightly different shade of blue. The OSL effect on the eyes and on the gun is a now neon sort of blue. And it's just those varying shades of blue that still keep the thing homogeneous without being lost with too much detail. And I think it's the homogeneous color palette that makes it work so nicely and balanced. But yeah, like I say, for me, a little bit of narrative was the only thing. I even thought to myself, if you had taken 2 strings of green stuff, rolled them together, and made them into what was like a rope, you could have just simply made a twirl of rope between his legs, done, Bob's your uncle, and you're finished. It's that little touch that would have made this thing a 10 out of 10 for me. But yeah, like I say, that's just me being nitpicky. As a judge, we have to be picky. And that's the only thing I could really fault in it, was just the fact that I needed a little bit more oomph on the narrative. Tell me where he is exactly. I know it's wood, but where? Yeah. Perfect.
So just to summarize, good use of color, good use of values, separation of elements, really well defined. The eyes pull you to the face. It's just a story.
Yeah.
Really good entry.
Very much so. Awesome stuff. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to S7. All right, S7, is it your turn or my turn? Your turn. Go for it.
Yeah. So what I liked about the story is I can immediately see the environment, right? I can see what has happened. And in saying that, I can see that there's blood flowing from this head. So I can see that when this happened, where it happened, and what happened, right? I can see 3 things here. You can see the use of tufts, which gives a little bit more information about the base. So I think the story overall is really good impression for me. For the color, I thought it was a great complementary scheme using the orange and the blue. The elements are nicely diffused from one another, right? So the majority of the middle section is brown with the spot color in the front of the bone. So I could really see the elements here, the different elements. So I think the use of color there was really nice. I would like some more general highlighting to define where the light source is. I felt like looking at this piece, a lot of it was felt like a base coat for me, which is not necessarily a bad thing because your base coating is done really well. But I would have liked to see a little bit more of highlighting. So for techniques, like I said, great basing is displayed, good use of the crackle paint and some extra tufts and things. And yeah, I think the washes are also aptly applied, especially on the weapon. If you look at the head of the weapon, it's given this nice little outline to the filigree, sitting it in place. Right? Yeah. I think your use of the amount that you used there was really nice and really clever. And overall, I think it reads well. The model is elevated from the base of the base. It's a little bit elevated, pulling my attention upwards to the model, not having the base influence the overall finish of the model. So yeah, nice entry.
Yeah, I think you touch exactly the same points. In fact, my notes, I've got just simply 2 things: base size and color. So like Hanru says, good solid core beginner basic techniques being shown. Nice, good, clean base coats, nice, clean delineation between all the different mediums and all the different materials on the figure. When it comes to then, like what Henry's saying, is the next evolution is now coming in and doing those highlights, making the knuckles on the hands stand out so that they really become prominent against the axe shaft. Paying attention to focus to highlights on the face would have drawn the viewer even more to the face. Even if you had just done one set of highlights on that face, would have popped the face even more so that I, as the viewer, get drawn naturally to the face. And that's always something that is very key in miniature painting. And then the second point I made with regards to the base, love the fact that there's attention to the base detailing. I love the fact that you've got a bit of grass tuft and you've got a bit of cracked earth. Just 2 things to be mindful of. The bigger your base, the more you lose attention to the focus, which is the figure in the middle. So if you make your base too big and you leave it empty like that, now what's happening is it's detracting away from the figure. So either you got to put in more detail into the base or reduce the base by simply keeping the original size base that the figure came with, because he's already got this cool giant's head on the base. It's already got a little bit of detailing. So had you kept the base just that alone, fantastic, because my eye wouldn't have been drawn to the rest of the base. But because there's now a bigger base, I need more tufts of grass. I need a bit more to give that narrative and that scene a bit more context, but also not to seem that, you know, it's detracting from the figure. But good solid entry. This one sits in the same category as, I think it was S3, the character with the horses, the water character with the horses. Same sort of critique. Good, clean, neat, but needs to pay attention a little bit more to making it not so flat and making it pop in certain areas for us.
For sure.
Cool. Right, let's move on to the next one. I've lost count. Are we on now S8?
So S8.
S8. All right, let me get started on this one. All right, with S8, what I did was I gave you points for story, because I love the fact that you paid attention to the base. The base comes, I'm sure, set standard as part of this figure. But the nice fact that you paid attention to giving it that rustic, concrete, stone sort of feel to it, paying attention to the candles, bringing in attention to the skull work and everything like that, which is nice work. And then, of course, the nice sort of homogeneous color scheme of using the silver and the blue, which is always a well-known combination of silver and blue. But once again, we boil back to the same things that we've been discussing so far. It's paying attention to those core techniques, highlights, bringing edge details, especially when you're dealing with metal. I can see that there was a lot of dry brushing work, which is fantastic. But don't forget that with dry brushing, you're dry brushing that luminosity across the entire surface. So you need to bring in highlighted silvers and metals to then bring attention to edges and sharp points and things like that. When I look at the photo as a whole, once again, I'm not drawn to any sort of particular focal points. Nothing grabs my attention. So that's something for that person to maybe focus on moving forward, is pay attention to face details once again, maybe a little bit of highlighting on the tunic and the cloth that is presented, because you can see the blue is there, but I'd like it to be a bit more prominent so it stands out as being the spot color, the primary color that's running through the figure. But all in all, good, solid, clean, neat entry.
For sure. For me, I also gave points to story because I could see where it is, and I could also see it was a dark place or it was at night, right, because of the candles. So it set the time for me as well. I think the constricted use of palette is nice. We've got brown, blue, and silver. The silver is very close to the grey. One criticism I had here was that the candle colors, or not the candle colors, the flame colors and the leather is very similar. The armor on the figure itself and the grey used for the base is very similar. So I think it's clever to have similar tones, but I think in this case it's not separated enough. So I would also make the flames a little bit brighter, because it's the same brightness as the leather, right? So I think if the flames was a little bit brighter,
like I say, when you set your eyes on it at first, your eyes wander all over the place because nothing's really grabbing you. So you're looking at the base, you're looking at candles, you're looking at swords, and your eye keeps wandering because there's nowhere for your eye to really sit and just pay attention to candlelight or the face or little details. So that's the one key thing that I think is important on this one, is start, being able to pay attention to those little elements that make the viewer want to stick around in certain points of view of your piece.
That being said, the restricted use of palette is a nice choice.
Very much so.
It keeps things simplistic, it keeps everything in that environment. It's really nice for that. Overall, I think the finish is really neat. The finish was really neat. It was pleasant to look at. It was nice to see the base and all the elements neatly defined with the washes and with the dry brushing. It goes well with the stone, for sure.
Absolutely.
So, the finish was nice to look at. Just a little bit of separation of elements and having certain things pop and draw the focus, like Richard also said. Good entry.
Nice one. Right, this is now S9, I think. I stand corrected, is it S9?
Yes, it's S9, yes.
All right. Okay. Hanru, you're up on this one.
Okay, I quite like this entry. I think for the story, it's a good base displaying her environment. What I loved about this is the mobility, right? So you have the base all the way down there, and you have the focus of the picture of the character up here. which I actually enjoyed that because I could see that she's moving.
Mm.
She's going somewhere. So not only did it show me where she was, it was telling me what's being done, right? Which is a good thing for me. I also think the colors on the base versus the colors on the figure can be a little bit separate from each other, but in this case I felt like it was also not a bad thing. Because it puts so much emphasis on the model, right? For color, the purples and the reds are definitely in a line to the scheme of a villainous female, right?
Yeah.
I put it in quotations, but yes, the red and the purple definitely screamed villainous for me, and the purple brings it back to that femininity for me, which was really nice to see. Overall, I could see on the chest and on the stomach and a bit on the legs, I could see that highlight had been introduced, right? I would like to maybe say push that 50%, 60%. But I can definitely see that you are starting to think about where light is hitting, where light is, what role the light is playing. Because she's facing up, she is going up, so having that light from the top really assists with that. Overall, really good use of color. I like the gold split versus the metal split. It's a nice definition from scepter to the other weapon. And then for technique, I think the freehand on the symbol, which is hard to see on the photo, but I'm assuming that it's freehand. Really neatly done, and I think the use of white is nice because it can draw your eye there, but it's not too powerful. Because it's in the because the base is so low, because the base is far away, using white was actually, in other cases, would be very overpowering. But I think here for me, I first looked at the figure. Next thing I noticed was the symbol. So I've got the colors of the figure symbolizing a villain, a female. Then the symbol also looks evil, right? So I think the thing was nice. It read well for me. I really enjoyed it. Focus a little bit more on those highlights, and this would have popped tremendously. I love the entry.
Fully agree with you on all of that. In fact, my notes, I make once again my usual faces and bases, and this one is a key example of what it is that I'm referring to. You look at the photo, and the first thing you're drawn to is the figure because of that bright red and that contrasting color. So good, tick of points for you that you're drawing my eye straight to the figure. It's not being detracted from the base. In having said that, unfortunately for me, the photo, although I agree with you, it's a great idea to provide that perceived depth, that the figure's now lunging towards me. What it does do is it detracts away from the base itself. So I don't be able to really get to pay attention to the base a little bit. Plus, there's no color that ties in from the figure to the base. So they seem to come from one world. It almost seems like the base is one entity and the figure is a separate entity. So that's the only thing that I would draw attention to. If you're going to make a figure that is very, very bright values of red, try and introduce maybe dark shades of purple or other shades of red into the base so that you tie the two with a nice homogeneous feel. Otherwise, the one point I want to make with this figure is that it needed one single step, one sit-down session, 20-minute paint exercise that would have made this figure, in my opinion, land in the top 3. And that is that if you zoom in, you'll see that there's no attention paid to the face. There's no highlights on the forehead. There's no highlights on the nose and the cheeks. If you had just done 5 minutes of just cheeks, nose, and all of a sudden the face pops, and I'm drawn to the face as the first viewpoint. So that's always something I'm going to be very, very sort of strict on with a lot of the guys, is that faces and bases are what make entries win competitions. The base gives me narrative, it gives me context, it gives me story. And then the face is the first thing that the viewer is drawn to. The face gives me the hero. It gives me the element that I'm looking at. So if that person had just paid attention to the face, even just a 5-minute little bit of a highlight, it would have made a massive difference, in my opinion, of where it stands in the competition. Otherwise, in my opinion, a solid, fantastic entry. I'd like to see this person pay a little bit more attention now moving forward. And how would you take this and take it that next step? But otherwise, a lovely, lovely piece. Cool. Right, let's move on to S10. I enjoyed this one. So yeah, let me get cracking on this one. Love this one. Really enjoyed it. I like the fact that you didn't overcomplicate things, that the base isn't too much, that it draws away from the figure. The figure is the focal point. The figure is what you want to see in this one. So I love the fact that less is more on the base, doesn't detract from the figure, but there's story, there's context. I can see it's a dusty desert environment. There's a bit of what looks like stonework and a little bit of dry grass. Lovely touch. Color wise, fantastic. Love the use of reds and oranges. Love the fact that the eyes are pure yellow, so that they really draw me as the viewer straight to the eyes. The eyes pop amongst all that red. And then another big pro is the fact that you brought in a bit of drool, so that you get this element of movement, and at the same time you bringing in, as the artist, your own little flair into the piece. And that's what we want to see in a competition. Anyone can paint a miniature. It's what you bring in to it and add to it that makes it pop against everybody else. So lovely ticks on all those fronts. The only point of concern for me is in the highlighting of the red flesh areas of the figure itself. There doesn't seem to be a light source there. I can't see if the highlights are pushing to the top parts of those elements, or if they're sitting in the middle of the elements or below the elements. So the highlighting is a little bit disjointed, but otherwise massive points for doing the highlights and paying attention to it, because like I say, you can see all the definition on the face, but I want to be able to discern where is the light source, so that the highlights all present in that manner. So if the light sources are directly above at high noon, the highlights would all be on the top portions of the musculature. So that's the only thing, and that's just me being nitpicky. But otherwise, I really enjoyed this entry, and a big thumbs up from me on this one. I really enjoyed looking at this one.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the movement, extra effort to bring yourself into the piece and
Yeah.
make it special. So I rated it quite high in story, because I can see exactly this thing is moving.
Yeah. And this is a good example of sometimes you don't need to make this massive elaborate base. Faces and bases, like I say, but bases, it's still got to be in the fact that it doesn't take away from the miniature. And in this case, it doesn't take away from the miniature at all. Your focal point is on Scary Horned Guy.
Sure, I think the palette was nicely restricted, controlled as well.
Mm.
You've got that red, orange to yellow, which is easy for the brain to see and to understand, and it draws that attention, like you said, with the eyes.
Yeah, and those horns, they've got the horns have got this lovely rustic feel to them, which is really nicely done. So yeah, really enjoyed that.
It's also being nitpicky.
Mm-hmm.
The tonality between the teeth and the base is very similar.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, very much.
Very similar. It's always a good thing to have some elements tie everything together.
Yeah, we've mentioned it earlier. Yeah.
My teeth shouldn't look like sand. Maybe have a different element that
Yeah.
tie them with the base.
Maybe a little touch of perfect pure white edge highlights on the very edges of the teeth, so that they pop more and they have a little slight difference in tone to the sand on the base. I agree.
I mean, we can talk about color theory as much, but it's also subjective at the end of the day. Maybe a little bit of yellow or a little bit of decay on the teeth.
Yeah.
Some other sense, but we tie much with the eyes as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but overall, this entry was really good.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. Good understanding of volumes, but I would say the understanding of value could be increased. So good understanding of volumes, right? Your volumes are really nicely separated. The muscle groups are really nicely separated, but focusing that light more to the top of the miniature, which is the value. So values, you still need to work on a little bit, but in terms of volume, I think you're starting to really get a grasp of what's happening.
Very much so.
Really enjoyed it.
Very cool. All right, let's move on to S11. All right, Hanru, you're up.
Oh yes, I love the palette on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically because there are browns, but all the browns are different.
Yeah.
I love that. But anyway, so this is a perfect example of where this story for me got a little bit more than a previous entry that just had the wooden floor, right? I don't want to compare things, but I'm doing it just to put into perspective where I'm not putting points for story. So we've got that little mug on the floor. So I could see this was in a tower, and I could see this is where this is going, right? Having that little story element in there was really nice for me to see.
Mm-hmm.
For the color, I thought it was really neat and simple. The different uses of browns was really nice for me. Brown is a difficult color because it can become very monotone very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can definitely see the shoulder piece from the piece extending to here is a different brown. There's more reds here. To the piece on the arm, there's more yellow in there, right? I could see the separation of the browns, which was really nice for me to see. So good separation on the elements for me over there. And I thought the eye was really cool, and almost looks like the eye is looking at the cigar and smoking, right?
Yeah.
Smoking the cigar. So really nice position on the eye as well. So that gives me for technique, that gives me a sense that you really understand the direction of the figure, if that makes sense. I would like to see a little bit more texture work on the leather, a little bit to separate that. Remember, we're not only separating by color or by hue, but also we're separating through texture contrast. So having a little bit more different types of textures on the leather would have been really nice. But yeah, overall finish, I think it was a neat piece, and the control of the browns was prominent for me in this one, and I gave a lot of consideration and points for that because I think it was well done in that respect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fully agree. It's funny, I made the same note, except my note said cannonball ? So this is in reference to that one that you and I discussed earlier. Perfect example of what you and I were trying to say about that piece is that it just needed that one little element, a piece of rope or a cannonball or something, and we now have the full context of the narrative. In this case, we get that because it's a small little element, and like I said, it doesn't detract from the base, it doesn't take away from the figure, but it's a nice little element that gives us just that little bit more story. Now, if that piece came with the figure, bonus. If it didn't and you've now added it, that for me, in my opinion, is another couple of ticks on the box because of the fact that you're bringing in your own personal extra element to the scene, and that for me is always important. Clean lines, clean base coats. Love the definition between all the volumes, as Hanru pointed out. Excellent use of colors. I especially love that shade of green and how it works with those shades of brown. None of the two values are too highly contrasted amongst each other. They almost seem to sit perfectly. At first glance, and at first glance, when I looked at it very, very quickly, I went, Nurgle! Because it's got that Nurgle tone. And in my opinion, this is like the perfect Nurgle tone. So if this person's ever thinking of painting Nurgle and moving forward with Nurgle, keep this color scheme, but you've got the right color scheme. But to be nitpicky and to be a judge, like I say, little points of advice: pay attention to highlights, especially when you're dealing with flesh. You want to be able to define all the different musculature, because the musculature is what makes the flesh pop, and especially on male characters where you've got such definition. I mean, you look at that forearm and you can see that muscle definition. So paying attention to the shadows of those muscles, and then paying attention to highlights of those muscles are what makes flesh really come alive and pop. And like I say, in my opinion, on this piece, that's the only thing that's missing, is the next evolution. That painter coming back and now revisiting the highlights and focusing some of the highlights. And like Hanru said, bringing in a bit of variety to the finish of the figure by bringing in some texture to the leather, maybe some cracks to the leather and things like that. But yeah, all in all, lovely piece, lovely use of color, lovely attention to story. Just a little bit needed further on technique so that you can keep growing as a painter. But yeah, lovely solid entry. Cool. Right, next one is S12. All right, so S12 I'll get started with. On S12, love the fact that we've got a nice base. We've got lovely bit of, bones and skull work, and I'm sure that actually comes with the figure, but nice attention for the painter to bring those things into detail. On the figure itself, lots of work needs attention. Love the use of colors. Love the fact that you've got that very sort of Warcraft kind of vibe of colors. The typical sort of red armor with the silver trim is always a favored combination. But just be mindful that the silver, in my opinion, hasn't been washed and hasn't been dirtied enough, so it looks a little bit too shiny for this, menacing, scary character. So a little bit of attention to metalwork, maybe bring in some washes so that you can produce that little bit of contrast, and the metal doesn't loses a bit of its luster and doesn't become too clean and too shiny. But here is where it's a good attention to core values, core techniques, and basic principles of washes, base coats, and then your color harmony. To me, what stands out about this piece is I love the colors chosen. And even though the colors work well together, nothing is really blending well together because nothing's been sort of subjected to those colors in turn, if that makes sense. So in other words, in the metalwork, if you had brought a bit of brown washes, the metalwork would have then tied in more with the leather being brown. If you had introduced a bit of that brown wash into the red parts of the armor, that once again would have tied in the leatherwork and the red armor. So it's just those things. To me, it, like I said, the metal really stands out because it looks a little bit too clean. One thing that I did make on my notes, which I said, exclamation mark is the axe. Love the attention of bringing in that lovely sort of neon blue wash in the detailing in the axe. That's lovely stuff. Take that technique and work on that technique and really, really expand on that, because you're on the right track there. But yeah, all in all, like I say, just a little bit of, this is a case of just that person needing just a little bit more guidance and pushing this thing to the next evolution. But it's a nice little entry and a solid entry nonetheless.
Sure, I agree. What you said about the face. It's nicely done. It's not overwashed. It's not overcomplicated. It's nice and simple. You can see what's going on. Nice differentiation between colors there. Talking about color, I also have some exclamation marks on mine, which says a lot of color. There's a lot of color going on.
Yeah.
What I liked about your use of color, your reds are parts with spiky bits, right? So your colors is defined within specific elements, which was clever because you're using a lot of color. Using those color on specific elements reminds the viewer, this is what I'm looking at. That being said, I thought that the color was a lot of saturation. The colors were really strong in comparison to the rest of the figure, which is that silver, silver kind of lacks color. And that's why I think that contrast between the silver and the colors is too much. Like Richard also said, if you maybe put in some washes or maybe dull it a little bit down to be more representative of what this figure is, it would also tie better with your colors. I love the weapon.
Yeah.
If you look at the back photo, you'll see that the middle part at the bottom actually has a little bit of OSL.
I saw that.
Yes, I would have liked you to expand that OSL maybe to fall on the knee, right, from the behind, and maybe brightening it up in the middle a little bit. It would have made it pop. It would have made it a nice color to look at, a nice feeling, a nice little bit of mood there at the back of the model. A cool detail that I picked up that I want to say props to you too is there's red in the skin.
I saw that.
If you look at that face, you can see that there is red in there somewhere, a memory color that you maybe use that then with green went over it. I actually like that very much because it gives a sense that this thing is alive.
Yeah, I almost saw I almost saw the confidence of the painter through the process.
Yes.
In my opinion, I almost want to take a bit of a guesswork here, but I wonder if the axe wasn't the last thing painted, because there I see a bit more confidence in the painter. I see nice glazing. I see nice bit of diluted paint that runs into the crevices, and then, like Hanru pointed out, there's a little bit of OSL as well. So it's almost as if I could see the journey of the painter becoming more and more confident to the point where the axe was the last bit, because you can see more confidence in the finish of the axe than I do throughout the rest of the piece. So in my opinion, that's a good thing. It means Mr. Painter or Mrs. Painter or hit or who, or we're not going to be any sort of specific gender. In my opinion, this is a case of please keep painting, because I could see the confidence build, and I'd like you to now keep that momentum going through onto your next piece and really take some of the critique that we've given you here today and run with it, because I think you're on the right track. I could see the confidence building in that axe. So, yeah.
So for me, good separation of elements. Maybe too good. Maybe you can tie it in all together with a tonality different or a tonality combination that brings them all closer together.
Yeah.
So as a nice touch, make it a little bit stronger, make it a power play in your piece, and also good variation in the skin. Overall, really enjoyed the entry.
Nice entry. Yeah. All right, let's get on to the last two of this category. So this is now S13, S13, S13. And yeah, I think Hanru, you're up first on this one.
Yeah, this was great to look at. I mean, you just see it and you go, damn, this guy's in a predicament. Like you in that mood because of the lighting used. So I said it was an extremely good use of the environment. I can see the mood. I can see the time. I can see you it's all portrayed through this OSL at the gravity of the whole situation, literally. Yeah, I really loved what you did with the base here. Yeah, I think your base is your strong point here. It doesn't take anything away from your character that you painted, because the colors that you used was quite smart as well. So it was a great use of, and I'm going to say this, gold colors, right, on the model, in the form of the blues, right? The blue is a gold color. But because you use the blue as a gold color, it enhances your OSL much without actually increasing value. Because of the warm color, because of the cold color on the model, it separates them nicely, but with your OSL, it brings them together immediately. It's two different entities, which is what it is. But your mood brings them together, which is not easily accomplished. I think you did a great job. That being said, I think the OSL can be a bit strong in the form of the OSL. So we normally have the strength of the light and source, and as the light moves away, it tapers off a little bit. I felt like if you had a little bit more light taper off, your mood would have been even better. I'm not saying your mood is not great, your mood is great. A thing that can assist with this, if you did some very stark edge highlights of the light facing the way of your light source, closer to the light source, that would have been perfect. That would have enhanced your OSL so much. Okay. So I thought it was also a good use of browns and yellows on the model to complement the environment. Okay. So not only do you use cold colors on your model, but you also use neutral colors to set the tone within the environment that the character was in. Really good use of an awareness of tying everything together. Felt was really good. So yeah, overall finish, the scene creates a good mood, pleasant. To dissect everything that's happening. It's not hard to look at it. I can see everything clearly. And not to mention the back of the game is like a galaxy. There's some freehand down there. So for technique, that awarded you bonus points because you went in on a big flat surface and you treated it like a canvas, which I love to see.
Yeah.
I love to see that. I love to see the painter taking initiative and saying, I've got all the space, what can I do with it? How can I make it more interesting? And you did that. So definitely awarded extra points there. So yeah, overall, I thought this was a fantastic entry. Really good job. Really enjoyed it.
Yep. Hanru, I completely agree. In fact, this one for me wins the story component of the entire category. Out of all the figures in this category, this one stood out the most with regards to story. It got the highest points for me for story. Because A, you've introduced this lovely base and you've set the scene, you've set the narrative, you've set even a bit of tension and a bit of, stress, because we as the viewer are looking at this person dangling over these spikes and wanting to sort of now scream out for them and hope that they don't meet their demise. But in having said that, you then introduced a bit of OSL, so that adds more to the narrative. Now I've got a night setting. And I'm excited. I can see this person's either breaking in or breaking out of a place. Who knows? But it's all those elements that now just get me excited and get me shouting with glee in the middle of the night or by myself doing the judging. So this one gets my personal nod for best story out of the entire category of small figures. Love the fact that. I'm taking a wild guess here, but those spikes look like they were introduced into the figure by the painter. They weren't part of the base itself. That's just me taking a wild guess. I might be wrong. But if that is the case, once again, ticks on the box to the painter for bringing in more narrative. In fact, you've actually got me tense looking at the thing because I'm like, those spikes are almost as big as she is. Damn it, man. Please don't drop. So, story is one of the things that for me is always very important in miniature painting because it's such a big element of for the viewer. It just sets everything for us.
You're almost like, is there enough super glue on that rope?
Yeah, it's like please don't let go. So love that. And for me, like I say, I really wanted to pay attention to the story side of things because in my opinion, best story, lovely bit of work, lovely bit of inspiration of bringing in all those little elements to add to the story. If I'm going to be nitpicky as a judge, a couple of little points of interest is that, remember, whenever you introduce the element of OSL, object source lighting, you have to have two core elements to make OSL work. You need the source of the light and the effect of the light. So the source of the light, of course, is the lantern that she's got in her hand. And then the effect of the light is the glow that's happening on the walls. The two should always be clearly defined, one being much lighter than the other. Of course, the source has to be the brightest point of light. So I can see that attention paid. But what happens for me is that I see that the light source of the lantern, and then the glow on the wall and the character seems to be very homogeneous. I don't see too much variety in the lighting effect. But like I say, that's just me being nitpicky. That's me being the judge and trying to sort of give you some useful insights and some points that we'd like to bring attention to you. But like I say, all in all, lovely piece, lovely use of colors. I do get a little bit concerned, like I said, that the after effect, the glow effect from the OSL is very homogeneous across the character and across the wall. And you must remember that with glow effects on OSL, light reflects differently on different surfaces. So on walls, it would not be as glaring as it would be on her metalwork or on her own clothing. So be mindful of that when you want to create such a large OSL effect, that you need to differentiate between the glow, the source of the glow of the OSL, and then the effect, and then make sure that that effect is reflecting and hitting the boundaries according to the color that it's reflecting onto and the impact of that light. But yeah, that's just me being nitpicky. This for me, like I say, was one of those pieces that just had me shouting for glee, because it's awesome to see coming out of South African painters. It's awesome to see that guys are being brave enough to attempt things like such a big OSL effect. So yeah, not worthy. Love this piece. I give it a massive thumbs up.
The engine definitely says, look, I don't know if the spikes is part of the original print. But even if not, you can look at the print without it even being primed, and you can be like, look, I can kind of see the story here, right?
Yeah.
But this person brought in so much mood and tension. Perfect example of, the base comes with a printed story, but what do you do with that? How do you make it impactful? How do you present it to someone and have them go, oh, damn, what is happening here?
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what this person did. They took the story that was given to them and they made it their own. 100% made it their own.
Lovely stuff. Yeah, lovely stuff. Right, on to the last one for the category. This is S14. S14. Who was it that started the last one? Is it you or me?
Oh, you can go for it,
All right. Okay, cool. On this one falls into the same category as some of the other entries that we've seen earlier. Nice, good, solid core techniques like good base coats, good layering, decent use of color, nice attention to the fact that you bring in the detail of all the skull work on the base. Love the fact that you've got these reds and oranges that really portray the malevolence and the evil nature of the character, perhaps. The red and the orange elements bringing in that sort of fiery element. But what's lacking in this is, once again, those core values of highlights and being able to differentiate between contrasts and shadows, and bring the viewer something to draw the eye to. In this particular case, big thumbs up that the face becomes the lightest color in the entire piece. So it does draw my eye to it somewhat. But because there's no attention to that face given further, my eye then gets lost as it gets pulled in. So like I said, it's a little bit of attention to highlights and detailing, and being able to make sure that you pay attention to where you want the viewer to pay attention to on the piece. But yeah, this is one of those areas where I would say that, attention to, some of your core techniques moving forward with highlights and being able to introduce focal points. And at the same time, being able to also bring in a bit of luminosity, a bit of strength to your oranges and your reds, because I can see the reds there and I can see the oranges there, but they get a little bit subdued somewhat because that punch of highlight is lacking, and that's what I would want to bring into the piece. But otherwise, a nice, good, solid entry.
For sure. I agree with what you said. I think it's a good use of the base representing. This is the layer of the piece that sticks out of people's heads, right? You've got heads all over the place. The use of color, it was interesting because I can see that almost the same tone of red was used for the demon figure on the ground and for the flag and the pole in the demon, and also the cloth around the hero figure. I felt like that red was very similar. I would maybe to actually signify that this is the character we're focusing on. This is the character that we're right. I think your use of wash on the character might be a little bit excessive. I think you're using a little bit of details there. it's very dark in some places and very light in other places. So focusing a little bit more on your use of highlights and where you put them can be good. That being said, your face being brightest, like Richard said, is a good point for me to look at. It draws the eye a little bit there. I think if your face had eyes or some form of other element that would have worked so well, because you're staring down that demon while suffocating in its own blood. Having some eyes there looking at this thing would have really cemented the deal for me. I love the fact that you've got that red on the blade and the orange on the flag, right? That little bit of OSL tapering off from the orange wings. That being said, I think it can be a little bit stronger. I had to search for it. I didn't see it immediately when I looked at the figure. I wanted that element to be a little bit stronger for me. And I think it can be done simply by pushing the value a little bit more, having a little bit more value on the edges of said objects, and that would have made this piece stand out for me. But overall, I think it's a good use of the base, good use of color overall. The OSL is a nice touch, and props for making us focus on the face of the entry overall.
Nice. So yeah, I think that wraps up the small figure category. 14 entries. Yeah, lovely stuff, like I say. And a fantastic range of entries. Like I say, a lot of things that Hanru and I were just being nitpicky about, but a lot of other things where we're really trying to sort of motivate the person who submitted that entry to, in my opinion, it's almost a case of I'd like you to sort of either revisit it again and bring in some of those things that we give you feedback on so that you can see what it is that we're trying to suggest, or alternatively get on to the next miniature, get painting with the next miniature, taking from what you've learnt, but also taking some of our feedback and bringing that criteria into your next piece, because that's how you keep growing as a painter. Keep painting. But yeah, lovely stuff to see, and an awesome category. So thanks to all the guys that submitted entries into that category. And we're going to now move on to the next category. Cool. All right. All right, and we're back up and running again. Okay, so we're going to now focus on the next categories. So what we've decided to do for this next session, we're going to address some of the smaller categories. So the first one we're going to bring up for us today is the bust category. Let me just make sure I've got us in the right place here for the bust. Sorry. Let's do that.
Lots of entries, guys.
Lots of entries.
Trust me, it was a joy.
Right, so bust is there. Why am I not being able to change over the images on the bust?
Maybe you only have this one in the folder.
Shouldn't be it all. No, they're all through there. Manual, use hotkeys. Okay, go. And there we go. Now we're working. There we go. It's just catching up. All right, so that's B1. No?
Entry number 1 from the bust.
Yeah. So let me just get to my bust notes. All right, bust. Okay, so this is U1 for the bust category. U1, uniform 1. And Hanru, do you want to get the ball rolling with this one?
I'll get it rolling. For story, I felt like it's hard to introduce story to a bust, but I felt like overall it lacked a little bit of atmosphere and mood for me, as all of the tones are very set in stone for separate elements. So I would have maybe liked a little bit more of, the hair color could be more introduced into the clothes and into the skin and into the wood, which would have made it more homogeneous and created a mood for me. I think the use of color was really nice though. That being said, I really love the white that you painted. It's very subtle, yet very striking. It's very difficult to paint white and to make white look nice. And I also like the freehand. The freehand color that you chose is nice. It doesn't detract from the model. Also being white, but putting it in those recessed colors is very clever. And I think your off-white use on the flowers ties it nicely in with the clothing, while keeping it separate elements. The freehand on the purple flowers is also very nicely done. I would have maybe liked to see them a bit more opaque so that my eye can catch them quicker. And the special mention for this one is the eyes. The eyes are really nicely done.
Yeah.
It's hard to bring life into the eye.
Yeah.
And I can see the glint, I can see the highlight, I can see where the eyes are looking. So I think that's really good. And overall, yeah, I think the overall finish was really nice. Would have maybe liked a bit more attention to the face, a bit more brighter on the face. Like Richard also said, bases and faces. Here we don't have a base, but we actually do, because you've got some nice NMM inlay on the base with the name of the figure, which is
Yeah. I like that little attention to detail. Yeah, very much so.
yes.
Yeah, I think I'm in very much in agreement with you, Henry. In this one, this fits into that same category that I've used in the past with previous entries: clean but flat. So massive points to you, because for me, like I say, one of the biggest things for a starting point of a miniature painter is being neat and precise and providing smooth coats and getting a nice clean finish. If you're getting that right, then the next progression into playing with glazes and filters and highlights and modulation and everything becomes easier, because you've given yourself a great foundation. So on a foundation basis, this scores 10 out of 10 for me. Nice clean coats. Love the flesh tone that's been used. Love the nice neat trim of the face and the eyes and the details of the lips and everything like that. Love the attention to all the little flowers, all that detailing. But like Henry's pointing out, it's lacking that modulation of contrast and shadows and focal points, things that draw me to the viewer, as the viewer, to certain points and certain elements on the bust. Because at the moment, like I say, everything seems a little bit flat, because there's no attention to any sort of light source or any sort of really push to get me as the viewer to be drawn to certain things. But like I say, in having said that, for the core techniques, 10 out of 10, because for me it's a beautiful, neat, fantastic paint job. And in fact, like I've said before in one of the other pieces, this is the kind of piece I'd love to see that person revisit with this feedback and go, okay, right, so I need to work in bringing some more shadows and more definition to the musculature of the body and the face and the skin tones. Love the fact that there's some nice shadow work and some contrasting being introduced into the white. And like Hanru said, white is one of the hardest colors to work with. So the fact that this person has attempted it, and in my books has accomplished it somewhat, is a massive thumbs up. So this person has potential. They've got some good core foundation techniques, and I'd love to see this person now, concentrate on improving those skills and really pushing their game to the next level, because it's a good, solid entry. All right, let's move on to the second entry in the bust category. This is U2, Uniform 2. And I think we'll get started with this one. Yeah, so once again, we've got to discuss the whole concept of, like Henry said, when it comes to busts, it's difficult to discuss story, because a lot of people think, well, you need a base or you need a backdrop to provide story. For me, story comes in a number of ways, and especially with busts, the story comes in the use of color, the setting of an ambience or an atmosphere or a mood, use of color palette that then gives me the narrative of the character. If you're using, deep, dark red tones, you're giving me that evil, malevolent kind of figure. If you're giving me light, cold, bright colors, you're giving me someone who's maybe an elf and very clean and sharp. In this particular case, there's nothing that sort of defines that for me. So there is no story really being given to me with regards to any sort of mood or any sort of environment or any sort of atmosphere that's being portrayed. And having said that, once again, this is not an easy bust. I know, because I know someone who's painted this bust. I've seen this bust in person. It is not an easy bust to paint. So the mere fact that the person attempted this kind of a bust, massive thumbs up, because it takes bravery to attempt some of these pieces. The one key point that I made here, and this is the thing, is sometimes, guys, the point I'll make is a simple small process that you could have introduced that would have raised the game and raised the finish of the piece entirely. May not have maybe won you the category, but would have maybe given you a way more profound impact in how the image is portrayed. And that, once again, I'm going to bring up that phrase, faces and bases. Now, in this case, busts, bases isn't such a big relevance, although it does play a role because of choice of plinth, but we won't go into that. In this scenario, for me, what's lacking is the eyes. Even the attempt to bring in the pupils of the eyes would have now changed the entire focal point of this figure. Because right now, as I stare at it, it's a good solid piece. But if you zoom in, you can't see the pupils.
I read him as blind.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is if you're reading it, if you're going to portray him as blind, you need to give the viewer a reason to think he's blind.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You need to portray that. So either you've got to bring more emphasis onto the face so that the viewer is drawn to the fact that the face is painted with all the highlights, all the shadows, all the textures, and the eyes still remain, looking like they're blind. To me, that then the narrative would have been portrayed. Then I would have read him as blind. But because I'm looking at the piece, for me, I was thinking if you had drawn in the pupils, that would have made the face change overnight. I think in just that one thing of those two pupils on that face would have really drawn my eye as a viewer. But yeah, otherwise, decent use of color, nice core foundation techniques with base coats and so on and so forth. And like I said to the previous one, this is where, technique of highlights, contrasts, and shadows would really be an area of focus moving forward.
Yeah, so the story was a little bit conflicting for me because obviously I've said now I thought that this guy was blind, right? Because he's got that, looks like he's got that film over his eyes.
Yeah.
However, he's holding a book with text in it.
You see what I mean? So if you wanted to portray the blindness, what I would have done is I would have actually come in and maybe painted in Braille on the book. Then I'm sold. Then I'm like, I gotcha. Just by bringing in Braille, you could then get away with painting not painting the pupils, because then you're portraying the fact that the character's blind. So very much so.
So I thought he was blind until I went to the different picture, and I was like, okay, maybe he's not. So the story was difficult for me to envision. Your use of color I thought was really nice because you've got red and blue, right? So you've got red and blue running through the character, you've got red on your candles, and you've got blue as OSL on the back. So your lighting and your cloth is similar in color, which ties it in nicely if you look at the figure throughout, right? I enjoyed that. Clever use there. I think your use in different types of metal is nice because it shows me that this guy's royalty. The fact that you used gold close to the face pulls my attention a little bit.
That's it, yeah.
Right? Because it's more saturated, because it's a little bit more bright, it kind of forces me to look into that direction.
Yeah.
Another thing on the face that I really found was nice is the warm tones you used because of the candles, right? There's no OSL. OSL would have been a nice mood and story added benefit. However, your warm use of skin tone is complemented with the candles next to it. In my mind, at least, that makes sense for me. Your use of focusing on the wrinkles, I don't know what to call
the wrinkles of the brow line.
Yeah. The separation of the cheek. It really gave me a sense of that this is an older gentleman. So good on that on the face. Focusing on that. The overall finish I thought was nice, good use of colors, nice warm tone in the face. Story was a miss for me. Overall nice bust. And if I really have to be nitpicky, I think the fact that your dowel that you used just to mount the plinth was painted black, it would have fit more with the white of that environment than the white.
And it's crazy to think that we're being nitpicky about little things like, the plinth stand being painted black. But it's those little elements that when you take the photo, the image becomes way more of a focal point for the viewer and doesn't get distracted by these little tiny elements that could be a 5-minute exercise that changes the outcome, in a flash.
I keep scrolling to the dowel. It's very bright. It's a simple thing.
It's a simple
you
thing.
might think it's not included with the model, but it actually
it does play a role. Yeah, you got to remember that it's in competitions. Fortunately, in this scenario, we don't have that. But to give relevance to what Hanru and I are pointing out with regards to that dowel stick, is if there was another bust painted at the exact same level, and we're now having to decide who's going to win the category. If one had painted his plinth holder and the other one hadn't, the one who painted his plinth holder would have won. It's that little tiny element that could be the deciding factor in a painting contest. So yeah, a little bit of attention to detail, but otherwise, all in all, once again, another solid entry. All right, let's get on to the last one in the category. This is U3, Uniform 3. And yeah, you want to get started on this one? I have a funny feeling you enjoyed this one.
I did enjoy this. I really enjoyed the use of color, but I'll get to that. I would like to see a little bit more story elements elements, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
However, saying that, I think your choice of plinth is really clever because it ties in with the ruggedness of the character. So your story I actually rated quite high. I can see the scarring on the face, right? I don't know if this guy is just running into battle from a previous battle. I don't know if he's using new armor or the same armor. So having that scarring reflected through more elements would have cemented the idea that this guy's been injured. So I rated your story high. A thing that really pushed that for me was the use of plinth, like I said. Good use of plinth here. I enjoyed it. Your color, there's a lot of blue and greens in your skin, which I like, right? It keeps it interesting. It makes me look, hey, there's a little bit of green there, turning them all around, there's a little bit of blue here from the bottom. It's really nice and engaging for me to look at. However, there's a lot of brown. There's a lot of brown. And seeing this much brown, I would have maybe liked to see a little bit more of black lining, a little bit more of things to separate the browns from each other. Your skin is also a very brown tone, which is fine. If they introduced a little bit of black lining separating some elements, this would have been very pleasing to look at, because immediately, just looking at the face, you can see all the elements. If I look at the face now, I'm struggling to see all the elements, right? I need to look at them individually to appreciate them. But I really enjoyed your use of brown. Your different uses of brown is particularly well done. I would have liked a little bit more of texture on the leather, but the texture that stands out for me is the texture on the skin, the really rugged guy, and the texture on the shoulder plate. Loved it.
Yeah.
Really liked it. And then again, bringing that blue into the blade, that blue you have on the back of the character, keeping that homogeny throughout, I think was really, really nice. It's just the overuse of brown. I hate using the word overuse because you can paint the model in monotone. That's not the right term. What I mean to say is the use of brown without separating and defining elements more clearly is what I think was the downfall here. But overall, I really enjoyed this bust. Really well done.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with a lot of that. One thing that really stands out for me on this one is that it almost came across to me as one of those sort of art pieces where the person is really focusing on either an atmosphere, that perhaps this figure is underground and it's being lit by candlelight, and that's why you're getting this very homogeneous light source that hits the bust from one side. So lovely use of that kind of narrative, and gives me a very clear defined source of light. I can see that the light source is from in front of the character. So massive points with regards to that. We were also discussing on the community stream last night about, forthcoming painting events and painting challenges that we want to do on our community. And one of the suggestions I'd made was for us to potentially do an event where everybody would have a spin of the color wheel, and whatever color landed on your spin was the primary and main color you had to paint your entire figure or bust with, so that you could really take it as an exercise in understanding color theory. This model becomes almost a perfect example of that challenge that I wanted to do. Because like you say, Hanru, brown is the predominant color. So if this person had done that challenge and spun the wheel and landed on brown, in my opinion, 10 out of 10, you win the challenge. Because you've done such a strong focal point on the use of the color brown. If that was not the purpose, if you were simply just painting the figure up and trying to do all the elements as best as you could, what I would then say is, yes, there is a slight over excessive use of almost a golden brown hue that, like I say, almost makes the figure look like a bronze statue. Almost, for a very split second when you look at it quickly. But technique, lovely use of highlights, lovely use of definition, lovely use of color modulation. I'm loving that axe where it's got this. I can't tell if it's gold non-metallic, but it has that rustic feel, it has that weathered feel, and for me it's also a visual interest because I can see that green and that turquoise running through the shades of the colors. So lovely piece when it comes to the enjoyment of color. So in my personal opinion, this one gets a full marks for color, but technique is where I want to be a little bit strict, because the technique isn't defined by what the color is trying to say. So if you were trying to do a color harmony in brown, then that color needs to be running throughout and you need to lean into it. Whereas in this case, it's almost like you've started to lean into it, but you haven't. And that's why we're sort of deciding, is it an over excessive use of browns or is it a color theory exercise? But yeah, lovely bust, lovely work. Fantastic non-metallic work as well, which is nice because I can see that gleam off the top of the arm brace that's happening with that one arm that's in front. I like how that gleam is running along that line in a straight line. So lovely piece of work and a lovely bust. Cool.
Yeah, enjoyed the busts a lot.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to move on to the next small category, which will be the grim category. So let's take that away for us quickly, and we're going to swap over onto the grim category. I just want to make sure that we're on the right one. Now, unfortunately, one of the figures, one of the images pulled through upside down. And I've tried to get it corrected. Maybe I can try correct it for us while we're on the stream, so we'll see. All right, but this is the first one. Yeah. All right, but this is the first one. This is G1. G1, the entry is G1. And Hanru, do you want to get us started off on this category?
So, on this figure for the story, I didn't really feel like the base represented enough of what's happening. Right? We have some greens and some bits on the base as well. So I assume that this character is on top of feeding, like a feeding nest, right? I don't know if you got the same impression, but I felt that way, and the use of the green wash on the base and core, yeah, feels like there's some kind of nesting going around. For the color, the use of red I felt was a little bit excessive here. I felt that looking at the figure, I saw a lot of red. I didn't see defining elements. For example, if you look at the wing, the fibers running on the insides of the wings versus the solid flesh. I would have maybe liked to see a different hue of red. It's fine to use red as your main predominant color, but what I would have maybe liked to see is some variation in those reds used. And the spot colors, I really like that because it's a little bit more playful. I can see that there are some differences in the skin. And if you look at the back of the model and closer to the feet, you can actually see that there's a little bit of a difference of finish in some places, which leads me towards you trying to put some blood effects on it. And I could actually see that. So good use on the difference of finish on some of the elements. And then, yeah, I think overall I would have liked maybe to see, because you're using a predominant red color, to use a little bit more, increase the shadows a bit more in some places, increase the highlights a bit more in some places, just so individual elements makes a little bit more sense and it's not just one shade of red. So yes, yeah, that's
yeah, I think I'm in full agreement. But I'm going to say something now quickly, just to throw a spanner in the works for everyone, and I hope everyone takes this the right way. Grim dark, from what I understand, is a particular atmosphere. It's a particular mood, and everything is very heavily and sometimes over excessively weathered and worn to make the character grim dark. So in my personal opinion, and this is no offense to the painter, please take this the right way, this is not grim dark. What this is a style called Blanchitsu, which is developed by a famous artist from Games Workshop. His name was James Blanche, and he used to do some of the box art and some of the concept drawings for some of the earlier figures from Games Workshop, and he's still one of their most prominent designers. And he developed a style called Blanchitsu, that his painting style of his miniatures was almost reminiscent of exactly how he drew. Very loose, very random. There was almost no rules to his artwork. And this is a perfect example. So that's why I say, for the painter who painted this, please don't take offense. I'm actually giving you a compliment. If this was a Blanchitsu category, you'd be in the running. But unfortunately, because it's grim dark, there's no grim darkness that I'm getting from the figure. So it's simply a case of a great attempt, but I think the wrong approach for the wrong category. Because in grim dark, for me, like I say, you need to see a lot of rust, a lot of weathering, a lot of this moody, dark, grim atmosphere that you're trying to portray. And this one is coming through more across as a particular art style that is reminiscent of the Blanchitsu style. But like I say, that's a subjective view. That's my own personal view, and not meant to be offensive to the painter. But yeah, like I say, everything that Hanru pointed out is exactly what I would have said. I just wanted to make that clear delineation between the process of grimdark and how I feel this one actually sits into as a finished piece. All right, let's move on to the second bust. This one, unfortunately, is pulling through upside down. Let me see if I could rotate it, but then we might have an issue. Yeah, no, it's not letting me rotate it. I apologize. All right, but yeah, if everyone can sort of just look at it upside down while we're talking, you should be able to get it. Otherwise, you can always go. Otherwise, yeah, just pick up the laptop and turn it upside down. Otherwise, you can see the proper picture with the right rotation on the Madness 3D Discord under that category. All right, Hanru, shall I get started with this one? All right, this one for me was a real pleasure. Love the base, love the narrative. You've set the ambiance, you've set the mood. I love the introduction of these pillars and this column. But what I really enjoyed was the depth feel of the piece, that I was almost staring it down this entranceway, and there was this menacing figure at the end of the hallway. So lovely use of storytelling, lovely use of colors for that. I like the little bit of airbrush red that's been brought in to give a bit of the base, but what is important for me is that the base is not taking away from the figure, which is very important. So really nicely done, narrative wise, base wise. Kudos to the painter. The figure itself, lovely use of the colors of brown and those kinds of shades, but what worries me is that the browns almost detract a little bit from the figure being able to really stand out as a focal point. So even though the base doesn't take away from the figure to me still doesn't stand out prominently enough. So would it be nice to see a little bit more of an introduction to bright yellows and oranges as the very, very extreme highlights, so that certain things really just pick up and stand out a little bit more, as attention for the viewer to look at. Like I say, nice use of color palette, nice attention to detail, nice storytelling, and a nice narrative that gives me that perspective down the passage, which I really enjoyed looking at.
Have you ever played a Dark Souls game, Richard?
I might have in my many years of gaming. I might have, yeah.
So I just started describing this as walking into this long hallway, seeing this mother of a boss that I need to kill, and it's very ominous.
Yeah.
And I love the use of scale here. The pillars are so small in comparison to this massive.
Yeah.
The use of scale was very good. It gives you a sense of being overwhelmed.
Yeah. It's almost like you want to stand in front of this piece and lower your head so that you look at it from that perspective, so that your head is at the eye line of those pillars, so that you get that, humongous size of the character.
I love that. So for the color, I said it was a good use of a dark environment. The crystal lights aid in this effect.
Yeah.
And being red represents an ominous mood. The use of weathering effects on the miniature itself is done very well.
Yep.
It's not over dramatic.
Yeah.
It can quickly become over dramatic in Grimdark. Very quickly people can get carried away because the things that we use in Grimdark, the pigments we use, the tools we use is very powerful.
Yeah.
And the pile of skulls, what did I say? The pile of skulls in the beam represents heat for me. So if you look at the torso, well, the head of this model, right? It almost looked like there's an underglow on those skulls. And I think Richard highlighted it perfectly where he said more attention needs to be brought in to differentiate pieces on the model. I think if that glow was more representative of what the crystals was, and maybe of a little bit of a brighter feeling, it would have been so good.
Yeah.
I also feel like the crystals themselves, not the OSL around them, the OSL tapers off nicely. I like the tapering off effect.
Yep.
I think the crystals itself could have had a little bit more saturation and some edge highlights just to make them look sharp, to make them look like you don't even want to step or fall on them.
Very much so.
Overall finish, I think it was great, and the hallway view and the scale that you used really makes it an intimidating figure. And yeah, I think overall, just more attention to the top of the model, bringing more attention to that ominous pile of skulls in its chest, because I think that's what makes this. He doesn't have a head.
Yeah.
This makes the model
Yeah. Henry, you actually make a brilliant point, because if you look at the piece from the right way up, you get the viewer's eye drawn to the base and the viewer's eye drawn to the figure. Now, the figure, if you look at it now, you can see that twisted blade element. You can see the bottom half of the element, but the middle, the core piece that you were just talking about, almost gets lost. So just that little bit of edge highlights, little gleams of light that pick out little elements on that, so that the viewer gets drawn to that. Because effectively, I know this model, it has no head. So because it has no head, that's your face, and that's the viewer's viewpoint that you want to bring in. So that's the only area I would have actually paid a little more attention to. But all in all, lovely entry, lovely work, and kudos to the painter for the base work, because I just thought that was such a lovely element. Yeah.
Such a great story. You feel like the super person very far away, this massive thing. The OSL immediately, the way you view this is from bottom to top.
Yeah.
Not from top to bottom, which is actually, I think, was intended. And
Yeah.
it works well that
Very much so.
Scale.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at this thing from the bottom, you're like, oh, I'm in a dark hallway. Oh, this movie is ominous. The crystals.
Yeah.
Your eyes, you look up and you see this massive thing. Just the attention to what makes this model unique is it doesn't have a head. It's got a freaking pile of skull in its body.
Mm-hmm.
If there was more attention there, this would have been fun.
Superb.
Phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Nevertheless, amazing.
Lovely piece. Very much so. Very much so. All right, let's go into the last one in the bust. I mean, in the grimdark category. Okay, my laptop's taking a while to catch up with us and won't let me switch over the slide. Come on. No, all of a sudden now it stops and gives us hell. Okay, let me just transition again and see. And now all of a sudden.
So you're skipping, but it's not doing anything.
Yeah, it's not letting me change them over. Let me just see if I can. It did that just now, a second ago.
We just went through like 20. It's fine.
Yeah. And now all of a sudden it gives us a headache. You know, really, honestly. Come on. Why is it not letting me play? Okay, let me try that. It just won't let me change over the image. And it's weird because I can see the image. It's right there. Yeah, I'm going backwards as well. Nothing. It's letting me refresh. Weird.
Take a quick pause and then restart that OBS and see if that helps.
Yeah, let me just do this. Yeah, let me stop. Let me take this away entirely. So let's do this here. So let's take away busters here and let's transition. Yeah, you see, now there's definitely a glitch here because I've taken the view away of that and now it's not coming through. But it's still showing up on the image. Hey, something's glitching out on us. No, there's two coming through. What the hell's going on?
One's gone.
Yeah, now one. It's almost like it's playing catch up. It's weird.
It's like there's a delay.
There's almost like a delay. And now when I say swap over images, it's playing one of the other files. That's odd.
I think we should just restart it.
Man. Okay, let's try this one more time. Come on, Grimdark. Let's go, baby. Did you see that? I switch it over and it gives me the bust images. What the hell's going on, man? We've got a gremlin in the system. Let's pause that. Come on. Yeah, it just won't let me change them over. That is so weird. And it was working perfectly just a second ago. Let's unlock that. Let's unlock that. Do that. Try that. There we go. Damn it. I swear it was almost doing that on purpose for the best one of the bunch, you know, just to give us that frustration. Because yeah, I've been looking forward to giving feedback on this one, because this one was yeah, one of those little shots of glee in by myself in the dark when I was doing the judging on this. Just a lovely piece of work. So yeah, let me get started on this one. to start off, once again, it's that little tiny gripe about whether this really is grim dark. And I'm sure a lot of people will agree with me and argue and debate whether this is grim dark. But in my opinion, like I say, grim dark is not only just the effects of weathering and over excessive use of all dirt and grime and so on and so forth to make it grim dark. For me, grim dark is also a mood and an atmosphere. And this one definitely portrays the grim dark mood and atmosphere. It may not visually portray grim dark, but it does portray it as a narrative, as an atmosphere, as a mood. So definite ticks on the box with that. Love the backdrop. Love that the fact that the backdrop is this beautiful green color that doesn't detract from the figure, but is a lovely complement to the piece entirely. Love the composition of the base. Love the fact that the base is not overly excessive in comparison to the figure. So that's always something that people tend to struggle with is composition and making sure that the figure doesn't get lost within the context of a backdrop base. So this one ticks all those boxes. If I were to be nitpicky, I would say that the figure itself needs a little bit more attention to stand more prominent in regards to the scene in its entirety. But otherwise, like I say, wonderful use of color, lovely technique, awesome backdrop, awesome narrative. And like I say, this becomes more of a debate on whether it's technically grimdark. But in my opinion, it is, because it does portray that atmosphere and that mood of grimdark. Lovely techniques. And like I say, my only gripe is just that the figure could stand out a little bit more prominently, with maybe a little bit more highlighting that brings it more as the focus of the piece.
Yeah.
And that's it.
No, I love this piece, man. I looked at this many times.
Yeah.
I think in terms of story, I scored it quite high. Because this just represents the end of a battle for me in a world that's not our own.
Yeah.
Where do you get a green sky? And I mean, the green used does not detract away from anything. The green is a powerful color.
Yeah.
And even if you look at the bottom, a lot of the colors use these saturated colors. It's not saturated colors. And I think the balance is done really well, keeping everything desaturated but making it striking at the same time. And I think that the thing that lends it to be so striking is the great tapering of the OSL. If you look at the floor, you can see it's influencing that blue color a little bit, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the pillars more, if you look at the metals, it shines more on the metal. So keeping in mind what light does on different surfaces, this is a great example of how that is done to a great level.
Very much so.
It's just great to look at. And I know we always say base to face, right? I don't know if you look at this model, it's extremely center, horizontally and vertically. It sits right in the middle of the story below, of the story above, of the story at the back.
Yeah.
So foreground and background is done really well. The model even sits in the middle of that, because that base extends a little bit to the front, the backdrop extends a little bit to the back. The model is perfectly framed for me.
Yeah.
And the touch that sent this over the edge for me was the crow at the top, raking.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention how we try to create lines of sight so that the viewer can actually in a natural flow follow your scene with a natural line of sight, and those two crows actually create that line of sight. So if you look at the one crow in the top, it's almost like your eye is guided from the crow to the next crow down to the figure and then backwards onto the whole scene itself. So it's a lovely use of lines of sight. Love the crows being brought in. I feel almost as if the top crow, not enough attention was brought to it, because it almost looks very quickly as a black mark on the wall. So a little bit of edge highlighting on that crow would really make it pop. But otherwise, like I say, it's just a beautiful bit of work, and I personally think that's been brought into the piece. And like we've said, that's
the background was a different color than the dark background. That crow at the top
would have maybe stood out more. Yeah, very much so. Not just the use of texture, the flow of texture. If you look at the texture on the blade, it's flowing in the direction of the light. Yeah. I love the fact that the blade has this little tiny edge, bright highlight right on the edge of the blade. So it really makes the viewer look at the character, and then you follow the blade, and you actually want to follow the blade right to the edge of that light source. So it's just, this one just was one of those things that just had me smiling from ear to ear. Just lovely attention to detail on all fronts, on the model, on the base, on the narrative, on the use of color. It's just tick, 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 tick. Lovely stuff, man.
If I had to be nitpicky, I would say that helmet that the character's wearing, if that had a little bit more attention to how the light hits it, if the light was a little bit more intense for that, you should look at the bell right under it.
Yeah, yeah.
If you carry the same value intensity as that, even at 10% more, if I have to be nitpicky,
Yeah.
I think that would have pushed it a little bit more, but overall, I think this entry is great, especially the attention to detail on how light interacts with different surfaces.
Yeah.
Well done.
And you know what gets me excited, Henry, is I look at something like this, and you must understand that for years I've been trying to get the community going and get us and raise the level of talent that we can have in this country. And if I go back to 2018, 2017, when I first hosted Thunderbrush, and I remember the entries there, I could see potential, but I could see that we had a long way to go. But over the last year and a half or so, I've seen entries that, to me, would stand damn well at any Monty Sansevino or any, Model World Expo, or even a Games Day, Games Workshop event. And this one is one of them. To me, I'm just, so proud to see this kind of level of work being brought, and it's being done locally. Just, lovely stuff. Like I say, that's what got me all excited and gleeful last night, because I'm like, we're getting this here. And to have beginners be able to get in touch with guys who are painting at this level locally is nothing but brilliant for the community. So whoever this is, please share your work. Please keep motivating and inspiring others, because heck, you've even got these two judges inspired, because yeah, I love this one. Really, really love this piece. One of my favorites from the competition. All right, so that's the bust category and the grim category covered. We'll try that again. So Hanru, I know that we're going to stop this video now. You've got another obligation, another commitment that you've got to fulfill. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause this now, and we'll then edit this and post this for the guys in a short while, and then we'll do a second video with the findings of the diorama and the big figure categories. Yeah, the diorama one had me stressing, man, because I've not had so many diorama categories to judge, but all at such a brilliant level. It was just, yeah. But yeah, before we detract from the rest of the work from the two last categories we've given feedback on, we'll record that video for you guys a little bit later on today, and we'll get that posted up for you guys. Hanru, always a pleasure. I'll look forward to part 2.
For sure.
Sweet, buddy. Yeah, man. Let me know when you're ready for the second video, and we'll get that one recorded for the guys.
For sure. Thank you.
Cool, man. Cheers, buddy.